All right, let's talk about Wigan. When you hear that name, what pops into your head? Probably a couple of very specific things, right? Well, today we're going to look right past those stereotypes and dig into a story that's way deeper and more fascinating than you might think.
Yeah, a bleak industrial pier and a pie. Is that really all there is to Wigan? I mean, come on, we're going to find out. Let's dive in and see what's really going on behind that old caricature.
Okay, so we've got to start with the elephant in the room, or rather, the pier that isn't a pier. It's probably the most famous thing about Wigan, but well, it's not what most people picture. Let's unpack this whole national joke. You know, when you hear pier, you picture candy floss, seagulls, maybe an arcade, right? A classic seaside thing. But the reality of Wigan Pier was, well, a whole lot grittier. Forget leisure, this thing was all business. It was just a functional jetty for loading coal onto barges on the canal.
So how on earth does a coal chute get a name like Wigan Pier? Well, it turns out it was basically a joke. Just a bit of local humor, an exaggeration that probably got big laughs in the old music halls, way before any famous books got involved.
And speaking of famous books, that brings us right to George Orwell. His book from 1937, The Road to Wigan Pier, really locked in this image for the whole country. It was this incredible, tough look at working-class life. And even though the book wasn't really about the pier, that title, it just stuck. It forever tied Wigan to this idea of industrial struggle. All right, from the pier to the pie, this is the town's other big claim to fame, right? But this story, it's not just about what's for dinner. It's an amazing tale of how you can take an insult and turn it into something to be proud of.
So you might hear people from Wigan called pie eaters. Sounds kind of friendly, maybe? Nope. Originally, it was a real jab. It all goes back to the huge general strike in 1926. The story goes that Wigan miners went back to work before everyone else, and their rivals basically accused them of eating humble pie. And this is what's so great, here's where the story takes a turn. Instead of getting mad, they just owned it. They completely flipped the script. They took that insult and, with that classic dry humor, turned it into a badge of honor. It became a symbol of their resilience. And yeah, also a celebration of their amazing pies. And I mean, they didn't just embrace it, they went all in. They have the annual World Pie Eating Championship. A local joke becomes this global event that gets media from all over the world. How brilliant is that? It's a total masterclass in how to control your own story. Right, so we've busted the myths about the pier and the pie. But now let's go deeper. Let's peel back all those layers of coal dust and industry and look at what's underneath. Because Wigan has this incredibly deep history that goes way, way back. We're talking Romans, powerful church leaders, and even the English Civil War. Just look at this timeline. It gives you a sense of how old this place really is. For a minute, just forget everything you know about the Industrial Revolution. We're going back to 80 AD, when the Romans built a fort here called Coxum. Then jump forward to 1246. It gets a royal charter and becomes a major market town. And then, get this, it's the site of a huge battle in the English Civil War. The whole industrial thing, that was just one chapter in a much, much longer story. And back in the medieval days, Wigan was different. It had this really unique setup. They called it a rector's borough. Now, what that means is that the head of the local church wasn't just in charge of prayers and sermons. Oh no, the rector of All Saints was also the lord of the manor. He held real, actual political power over the whole town. Pretty unusual, right? The town's part in the English Civil War is absolutely fascinating too. You have to remember, most of the region was on the side of Parliament, but Wigan, it was this staunch royalist stronghold, a lone island of support for the king. It was even the headquarters for the Earl of Derby. And the Battle of Wigan Lane, which happened right in the town, was a massive, crushing defeat for the royalists, a really key moment in the whole war. Okay, so from that deep history, let's jump forward a bit and talk about the things that really make the town tick today. We're talking about the town's true heartbeat, its soul music, its passion for rugby, and some seriously famous songs. Now, this one might actually blow your mind. In the 1970s, this place called the Wigan Casino, it wasn't just some local spot. It became the literal global center of the entire Northern Soul movement. People came from everywhere, thousands of them, for these legendary all-night dance parties. Wigan became a pilgrimage site for an entire generation of music fans. Incredible. And then there's sport. You just can't talk about Wigan without talking about sport. The Wigan Warriors are, no exaggeration, one of the most successful rugby league clubs in the world, full stop. The town's produced absolute legends, like Billy Boston, who was a true trailblazer for black players back in the 50s and 60s. And then, the football club, Wigan Athletic winning the FA Cup in 2013. I mean, that was a real-life David versus Goliath story. Absolutely unforgettable. Of course, all of that modern culture was born from its industrial past. And the scale of that industry, it's just hard to get your head around. The town sits right on top of a massive coal field. We're talking over 1,000 pit shafts within just a 5-mile radius. 1,000? It became this global powerhouse of coal and cotton, building these enormous super mills like Trencherfield. 2,500 horsepower. Just think about that number for a second. That's the raw power that the massive steam engine at Trencherfield Mill could kick out. It's one of the biggest of its kind still left in the world, and it's just this incredible, roaring reminder of the sheer engineering force that built this town. So what happens to a place like that when the coal runs out and the giant mills go quiet? That's what we're looking at next. This incredible, resilient transformation from a landscape of coal pits to one of beautiful, thriving wetlands. And a huge part of that transformation is something called the Wigan Flashes. Now, these aren't your typical lakes. They're a direct result of all that mining. They were formed when the ground just collapsed into the old, empty mine tunnels below, which then filled with water. And what's happened since is just amazing. These massive scars on the landscape, these reminders of a dead industry, have been totally reclaimed by nature. Now, they're actually a protected site of special scientific interest. They're a haven for rare wildlife. It is one of the most incredible comeback stories for the environment you'll ever hear about. And you can really feel that forward momentum in the town today. They're breathing new life into the old Pier quarter. They're pouring money into amazing public spaces like Heggie Woodland Park. They're making the most of being so well connected to Manchester and Liverpool, but they're doing it all while holding on to their amazing heritage with all sorts of festivals and local projects. When you step back and look at the big picture, you realize that Wigan's story isn't just about one town. It's really the story of the country in miniature. Its history of war, of being this industrial engine, of its passionate labor movements, all of that is woven directly into the fabric of Britain's own story. So let's end on this thought. This is a town that managed to turn a silly joke into a world championship and turned a slag heap into a sanctuary for wildlife. When you see that incredible ability to reinvent and adapt, what does Wigan's resilience really tell us about what's possible for the future?